Hello and welcome to a special edition of Race to Represent on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. I'm Ben Max, executive editor of Gotham Gazette. New York's 2018 election season is gearing up. Almost all statewide seats are up for grabs this year. Governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, as well as U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand's seat. All of the 27 seats from New York in the U.S. House of Representatives and all of the seats in the state legislature, 63 state Senate seats and 150 assembly seats are also at play. There's a lot to watch for this year. Race to Represent will bring you coverage of as many races as we can. Our first special election is Tuesday, April 24th. Candidates are seeking the vacant seat in the 74th Assembly District. A debate among all four candidates vying for that seat and seeking your vote on April 24th is right after this show. My guest with me now couldn't be more qualified to discuss the 2018 election year. It's Brendan Cheney from Politico New York and Dr. Christina Greer, an associate professor of political science at Fordham University. So thank you both for being here. So Christina, let's start at the top of the ticket, the big race that's going to dominate a lot of this election season, the race for governor. Governor Cuomo seeking a third term. He's being challenged from the left. He's got people on his right lining up to challenge him if he makes it through the primary. What are you watching here in the early going in the gubernatorial race?
Well, the third term is never as easy as many people think it is. You know, it's much easier to ask someone for a second term because you can say, I've been here only 4 years and I still have quite a bit of my agenda that I'd like to accomplish. Asking for a third term is a little more complicated. You're essentially going back to the voters and saying, I've been here 7.5, 8 years, and I'd like years 9, 10, 11, and 12 to continue my mission. Well, what has been your mission and what have you done for the past almost decade? So I think that that's a harder sell. I think for Cuomo, he's also in a bit of a tight situation just because he does have sort of some corruption trials of his inner circle that will occur this summer. And, you know, so many people are so tired of the corruption in Albany, even this idea of corruption, where they can look to the governor and sort of his inner circle and say, are they part of the problem? Is he part of the problem? As far as the challenge on the left with Cynthia Nixon, I mean, she does represent someone who is an outsider. We saw in the 2016 election and elections across the country, sometimes celebrities, I mean, they all range in skill set and quality, but some people really do want someone who's not entrenched in government politics to come in with new ideas, maybe new people. Cynthia Nixon has been politically active for quite some time. She is relatively well known, but she also knows how to connect with an audience in a way that the governor just not a strong suit. And we do know that he struggles with sort of dealing with smart women on an interpersonal basis. And then as far as the right is concerned, if the Republicans can put up someone who's not a Trumpite, but who represents maybe, I would say, a 21st century version of a Pataki, then I think Cuomo has some really challenging troubles ahead of him if he can even get through the primary, because some people are really frustrated with his constant bickering and fights with the mayor of New York City, with the fact that they feel like he's dropped the ball on several issues, ranging from housing to the environment to sort of not being a progressive Democrat and also sort of co-signing the IDC and all of their sort of Republican-esque behavior.
Yes, let's follow up on a few things you said, but Brendan, you know, broad strokes, I mean, what are you looking at as this campaign really gets going here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary is sort of the first thing to happen, and that's going to be, I think, the most interesting to begin with. And, you know, trying to see if Cynthia Nixon can come anywhere close to the support that Zephyr Teachout had in 2014. It's really hard to predict because, you know, Zephyr Teachout did well upstate, right? Like Hudson Valley, Catskills, Capital Region, even the North Country a bit, and then over into Central New York. But that was based on hydrofracking and environmental issues and some other things that are not really issues anymore, right? So like what are going to be the things that animate Democratic primary voters this fall? And you know, Cynthia Nixon's trying to do a lot more in the city where Cuomo is actually really strong. So I think it'll be interesting to see what are voters going to care about in the fall, and will Cynthia Nixon be someone who can deliver on those things?
I think you raise a very interesting point, which is Zephyr Teachout put forth with no name recognition at the start of her campaign, almost no money, getting a late start, no institutional backing, put together a pretty solid campaign and won a third of the primary vote, right? Cynthia Nixon starts in a totally different position. She starts a lot earlier. She's easily able to raise money, pretty quickly just based on having some name recognition, having a background, having a reasonably, strong campaign infrastructure to start. But on the other hand, some of those issues that were big issues in 2013 into 14 are gone, or at least partially gone. And the other thing that motivated a lot of the Teach Out voters not only was the environmental issues led by fracking, but was also education reform and high stakes testing and the opt-out movement. And Governor Cuomo has basically reversed himself on all of that. So that energy is not there anymore. The teachers' unions are much more quiet around Cuomo.
Well, I don't think that Cynthia Nixon will do as well upstate as Zephyr Teachout did, but I do think that she could chip into his downstate base. I mean, we know that she announced in Brownsville. We know that she's made it explicit that she will go after black women as sort of the keepers of the Democratic Party and the keepers of democracy. We know that many people in her campaign and the camp are post-Zephyr Teachout folks.
Including
Teachout
Zephyr Teachout,
is
yes.
the treasurer of her campaign. She's got sort of political consultants who are not novices. They're sort of the architects of Bill de Blasio's very sort of surprising campaign in 2013. And so I think whenever we look at 2018, the shadow of 2020 is evident, just because even if Cynthia Nixon doesn't win on September 13th during the primary, if she gets anywhere near what Zephyr Teachout got in 2014, Andrew Cuomo's chances of being a contender in any capacity for the Democratic Party in 2020 are essentially evaporated. If you can't come out strong in New York State, which is, when you look at the map of 50, is like the bluest of the blue, then I think that the larger Democratic Party would have some real concerns about him as a viable candidate.
Well, especially if he would have to be eyeing winning a primary for president, right? You have to speak to that base. What is at stake for Andrew Cuomo here? Does Cynthia Nixon have a chance?
Like I said, it's going to be hard to see what the issues are that she can get primary voters to vote on, right? I mean, it's really, really hard to beat an incumbent, especially in a primary. And he's, I think, as much as he's done a pretty bad job at the beginning of responding to her attacks, right, in the press, on the policy side, he's been trying his best to try and remove the things that would be rallying points for her, right? So he's worked with the IDC and the Democrats in the Senate to come back together, putting up money for public housing. He's working on the MTA to some degree, right? I mean, he's trying to get rid of everything that could be a negative in an upcoming primary.
Yeah, it seems like, at least to start, she's focused on education funding, which has been her issue. That's the thing where if she's been involved in politics, that's been the number one thing. She's had a couple other causes for sure that she's been involved with, but she's been around and she's been an advocate and closely aligned with the main education advocacy group, Alliance for Quality Education, that focuses on education funding. So that's her main topic, and she's attacked the governor on that, and he comes back and says, our per pupil funding at the state level is the highest in the country, right? And so he is trying to head off that attack to some degree. They also put some new measures in the state budget to force cities, especially New York, to show where that funding then goes, school by school. I don't know how far that's going to take them in the primary, but at least it's another measure to needle Mayor de Blasio. But clearly, education funding and the MTA are right at the top of how she's attacking him. But she is also going to have to go upstate, right? She's going to have to speak to voters outside of the MTA region.
Right. But I think she has time to sort of craft that message. We know that the governor is going to start giving out Easter eggs to all the electeds. We've already seen that because he needs them to endorse him. And, there have been many people downstate, especially, who've been a little slow on the uptake to say, like, we'll just wait and see. But I do think, especially when it comes to MTA funding, I think that that's where Cynthia Nixon can pick off a lot of Cuomo supporters, especially in a primary. We have to think about the types of people who turn out in a primary. This is purely anecdotally, but 4 years ago when I would, sit on a stalled subway and you'd hear people say, like, thanks a lot de Blasio, right? And, I'd secretly whisper, like, it's not really him. But now, 4 years later, clearly something in the marketing has changed, because when we're all sitting in a dilapidated subway car, people are railing against Cuomo. So there's an there's an issue education that clearly has occurred in those past 4 years. So I think that that's one piece. The second piece with housing, you know, if Cynthia Nixon can make the case where it's like, this is the former HUD director, and this is where our New Yorkers are living, right? 400,000 people in New York City live in public housing. But I believe if we look at the numbers of 2014, I think 20% of Cuomo's downstate voter population came from public housing. So if Cynthia Nixon can make some inroads downstate, she'll sort of compensate for that. And then over the summer, I think, whether it's cleaning up Albany and corruption or whatever issue pops up, you know, she has a stronger foothold. But I think she also represents the civil war in the Democratic Party, which is when you say you're a Democrat, do you want to be a progressive Democrat or a centrist, sort of Cuomo-Clinton Democrat a la the 1990s to sort of pick up that largest group in the middle? And some Democrats think that that's the best strategy moving forward, to get those weak-leaning Republicans and independents. And others, I think, sort of the Cynthia Nixon primary voters would say, no, if you're a Democrat, I want you on the left fighting for progressive issues and no compromise.
She came out swinging on that front, right? Basically calling Cuomo a fake Democrat. And he has responded, as you said, by pretty quickly after the state budget was passed, announcing that he has brokered a deal between this fractious conference of Democrats, 8 members, to come back to the mainline Democrats. They still don't have a majority in the state Senate. They're trying to work on that. There's some special elections coming up April 24th and then the fall as well. And we've seen the governor not only do that, but then also he's been campaigning in Westchester, where there's a very important state Senate seat up for election on April 24th, and campaigning on Long Island, where there's key races coming up in the fall. It seems like he's maybe approaching this differently than he has in the past because he sees that vulnerability.
Yeah, that, and I think, yeah, I mean, you can see him trying to get union support as well, right? Knowing that, like, you know, primary voters are often members of unions, and so the more union support he can get, the more support he'll have in the primary, and I think also maybe the more likely he will be to get the Working Families Party line again, which he did get in 2014, but it was a big fight. And he had to make some concessions that I think he didn't want to make. So I think those are all things he's doing to try and shore up his left.
And so we've talked a bit here about how Cynthia Nixon's attacking him. We should mention that former mayor of Syracuse, Stephanie Miner, is still considering a run for governor. She might jump into this Democratic primary mix, which would toss the whole thing in a new direction in terms of it not really being a one-on-one battle, which could complicate things quite a bit. We're talking a bit about how Cynthia Nixon's attacking him from the left, the fracture in the Democratic Party that this indicates. What's the governor running on? You know, he's had to try to shore up some of these issues, but if you ask him and many others, he has a record, right? He has a record to run on. He's accomplished some things going back to the first term. Marriage equality, a pretty major piece of gun control legislation. How is his record? I mean, what do you make of his record?
I mean, when you hear him talk, whether he's criticizing Bill de Blasio or campaigning against Cynthia Nixon, he talks a lot about his experience in getting things accomplished, right? That he says Bill de Blasio campaigns a lot of things and tries to push for a lot of things, but Cuomo's the one who can get things done, right? So whether it's minimum wage, like you said, marriage equality, that there are these things that he has done, on-time budgets for, I think, every year, if not every year, then almost every year, and the one that was close.
And for folks that don't know, before Governor Cuomo came into power, that was not the case often in Albany, and he has really, even though there's still major problems with how things get voted on in the middle of the night often and things of that nature, he has brought some semblance of order back to state government that was lacking for a while.
Right. Yeah. But going back to what you said earlier, it sounds like what he's talking about is effective management, but I don't hear a lot about what are the things he hasn't done that he wants to do, right? It's like, you should trust me because I can do things, but I'm not sure what it is that he's left undone that he needs 4 more years to do. I haven't heard that articulated yet.
And to your point, he talks about having been able to get these things through a divided legislature, but people turn around and say, hey, you helped create that divided legislature.
Because of you, right. And, and I think for Cynthia Nixon, who is doing some real retail politicking in black communities, I don't think that she's going to miss an opportunity to remind voters, female voters, voters of color, female voters of color, that part of the reason why there was so much gridlock was because Andrew Cuomo was stripping power away from Andrea Stewart Cousins. And symbolically, having the governor taking power away from the most powerful woman in state government, the most powerful woman of color in state government, doesn't fall on deaf ears. I think the sort of fighting with de Blasio is getting on a lot of people's nerves. I mean, it's sort of, if you grew up with a sibling, it's like the oldest sibling should be the mature one, right? Even if they're in the wrong, it's like most of the times your parents are like, you're the oldest, do better. And so I think some people are feeling like, well, you're the governor, because so much of the mayor's budget is tied up in the state budget. There's so much that the mayor actually can't get done because he has to go with his tin cup to Albany. And because of this rift between these two men, we see New Yorkers suffering in many ways. So I'm curious as to how he frames these progressive issues, but also these centrist issues at the same time, because he seems a little schizophrenic at times. Sometimes he comes to voters and says, I'm the most progressive mayor or progressive governor you've ever seen, and I've done marriage equity. It's like, well, we were number 17. Like, if you were really on it, we could have been in the top 5.
And that was in 2011.
Exactly. So what have you done for me lately, right? And so he sometimes says he's the most progressive, but then other times he puts things up, but then he sort of knows that it'll never get through Albany and doesn't really follow through. I'm thinking about some of his prison reform stuff, where if you're not really paying attention, it's like, oh, wow, if you're a progressive voter, you really think that he's pushing this agenda. And it's like, no, he just kind of threw it out there, but there was never any intention to fund it or follow through.
Well, a few of the things you said hit on the fact that Andrew Cuomo is a masterful politician in many ways. Now, he's made a lot of mistakes, and he stumbles sometimes, and he's flubbed some of the early Cynthia Nixon challenges. But you can already see this issue of not empowering Andrea Stewart Cousins. He's trying to take that off the table by announcing this unification deal. He came to the table, though, with the unification deal right after a budget was passed, where he was able to, again, sort of play the middle ground. And now he's saying, well, the things we didn't get in this budget, now those are the things we need to accomplish with a full Democratic legislature, right? And so he has that talking point now. The question, in my mind, around some of that and other of the Democratic Party machinations are, has people's awareness heightened to the point, especially primary voters, that there's enough people now who know all that, who've seen it all, that he actually pays a price because of the election of Donald Trump, because the IDC's been around for a long time, that people have, and because Cuomo's been around for a long time, that people have sort of understand some of those political tricks that he's playing, and because he's been around a while, they might not work so well this year. Or, as people start to really pay attention to the election, which isn't going to happen still for weeks and months, does everything he's saying sound pretty good?
I think it's harder to make a talking point that the governor had for a long time empowered the IDC, but now isn't, instead of going into the election saying, like, the governor is still empowering the IDC. Right? And I think it's the same with the people who are challenging the IDC, by the way, is like now they're saying, like, well, we don't trust them, but for a long time they were with Republicans, even though they're not now, right? I think that's a much harder talking point to make, to say that that this used to be the case, but it's not anymore. And so, I think it's going to be hard for people to use that as a really effective.
I think that makes a lot of sense, but I also do think there is a heightened awareness, and I don't know where that's going to come down, but I do think that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted to add, you mentioned criminal justice reform, the notion of bail reform and making major changes to the requirements around bail did not make it into the budget, although the governor has said he supports that. That's one of the premier things he's saying still needs to be accomplished. The DREAM Act, early voting, campaign finance reform. There is a pretty big list of things that he went through in a very interesting fashion, sort of admitting that he wasn't able to get them passed, but then putting blame on the Republican-led state Senate and saying, now we're going to accomplish this. Very, very similar to what he did 4 years ago, by the way.
Right.
It's a very similar playbook.
And I think if Nixon can sort of help braid that rope to help voters understand, it's difficult for you to vote. We're number 38 in the nation because of him, right? As far as ease of early voter registration and turning out. Like criminal justice reform, if you're a progressive Democrat and you care about this stuff, we actually are, whatever number in the nation because of the governor. So as we get closer to September, I think the summer is going to give us a lot. If Nixon can sort of make this case, it's like, yeah, maybe he has done a lot. However, for the core issues and values that we still really care about, they always seem to get, thrown by the wayside. Now, what could help Cuomo quite a bit, I think, in September is if our president is in shambles, which, who knows, he seems like he's a phoenix as well, where he just keeps rising from the ashes. But just in case he isn't, I think Cuomo can also look to voters and say, well, you know what, we tried the celebrity, and we actually need someone who does understand government, who has worked in government as long as I have. And so she may have some great ideas. I'll adopt some of them, and I'll think about the others. But maybe we need to have someone who is entrenched in Albany, forget about the scandals and everything that happened this summer. I'm the adult of the two candidates.
It's definitely another interesting dynamic because you do have the outsider who has some experience in policy and is a very different candidate than Donald Trump, of course, in Cynthia Nixon. But where are voters in terms of stability, someone who's been there, someone who has a very long government resume? I don't think we know that yet. It will be interesting to see if there's some polling on that. It'll be interesting to see if even just after a few weeks or a couple of months of campaigning, if Nixon's poll numbers begin to rise. One of the things about her is she's going to get a lot of media attention. She's not Zephyr Teachout, who people are not taking that seriously. I mean, she's getting a lot of attention, and that may serve her well, or you might just have this really strong block of Democratic voters who know Cuomo, know the Cuomo name, feel like the state is doing okay, at least, and are okay with continuity when you have chaos in Washington. The state Senate, as we've indicated, the entire state legislature, both houses, on the ballot this fall. We have some special elections coming up April 24th. Everybody should also know, we could talk about this if we have some time towards the end, congressional primaries in June. New York has a very complicated voting system, as we've touched on. There are separate primaries for Congress and for the state level seats. So you have congressional primaries in June. In September, we have the state level primaries, the Cuomo-Nixon, but also the entire state legislature is on the ballot this fall, and then of course the November general election. So state Senate control is at stake in this election. Why does that matter? Most of those elections that matter are not in New York City, but why do New York City voters care?
Well, the fate of the state Senate hangs in the balance, right? Right now, there are 31 Republicans and 1 Democrat who caucuses with the Republicans, right? So they've got majority control of the body. And so the hope is that the Democrats are hoping that they can win enough seats in November to take control, working with the IDC, right? There's eight IDC members, I think 21 Democrats, there's 2 vacancies. And if I think everybody nationally and it seems locally, the feeling is the environment is better for Democrats this time because of how bad Trump is doing. And so there is this possibility. I think Democrats are looking at, I think there's 8 seats, I was looking at 8 Senate seats that are held by Republicans where Democrats have an enrollment advantage, right? It's like those are the seats they're going to be targeting. Long Island and Hudson Valley, yeah. I'm not sure they'll target every one of those, right? But those are places where Democrats can look to, and what they need, I think just 1 seat, really. I think they'll want more than that, right?
A couple
you want a bigger majority. But it looks like they have a good chance of getting enough seats to take back the majority if the IDC stays with them.
Right. And we folks should know the state assembly is in Democratic control and will be probably forever. The part of what some people are upset with Andrew Cuomo about is the redistricting that he oversaw and wound up signing off on after the last census that helped create very strong Democratic Assembly seats and very strong Republican Senate seats, even though Republicans are really trying to hang on to any semblance of power at the state level. You have a Democrat governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, all statewide seats on the ballot this year. And then you have the state legislature where the Republicans are holding on to control of the Senate, and really largely thanks to Brooklyn Senator Simcha Felder, who is a Democrat and a Republican and caucus of the Republicans. So a lot of these policies, like bail reform, like early voting, people are saying, including the governor, that these are basically on the ballot this fall, right? That if the state Senate goes Democratic, you're going to see a wave of progressive policies move through. Do you buy that? Is that the case? We
could. I mean, what's, for me, the sort of necessity of getting these seats back is for the census and redistricting when it sort of comes through. So we know we have the 2020 census. We know we'll start redrawing some lines around 2021. So getting people in place past their first election, once you sort of successfully win your first election. The second one is a little bit better.
Unless
and
you're
then,
arrested,
And
yes.
then, you know, you can become Charlie Rangel and win 23 races over 46 years. So to me, that's what I'm really looking at. And, you know, when we look at so many of these primary numbers, you know, for so many of these districts, the primary is the general race, right? I mean, once you get through the primary, there's sometimes not even a challenger on the ballot. We're seeing people go to Albany with 8,000, 10,000 votes, maybe. And these are people who are in charge of budgets worth in the billions, like worth more than some countries, actually. And they're deciding things not just about bail reform and prisons, but about our bodies and our families and our education. And funding for our education especially. So that's what I'm trying to ring the alarm about. I think also, though, you brought up this really important point about our American democracy and sort of the lack of civics education. We ask our electorate in New York to go to the polls so often. We just had local elections last year. So that means if you're a participatory Democratic voter in New York State, you have a special election in April, depending on where you are, and you need to know whether or not you should be participating. And then you've got the congressional primaries in June, the state Senate and state legislature primaries in September, and then in November for the general. That's 4 different times that some New Yorkers are going to vote. And they already voted 3 or 4 times
We
last
just
year,
had a city cycle.
and 3 or 4 times the year before that. So I think that to me is also
Training people maybe to
yeah,
just expect to
the
vote
ci-
3 or 4
yeah,
times
exactly.
a year. Yeah, it's a lot.
I
yeah.
think it's a lot, and I don't think that it's voter apathy always. I think sometimes it's voter fatigue and just a lack of voter education. So that's also the piece that hopefully,
Like a voter convenience.
yeah.
Yeah, the lack of early voting. You know,
Well, thanks to the
is
governor,
obviously-
we
is
have a lack
obviously
of
clear. Yeah.
convenience.
So in our last minute here, you know, we are setting the stage for this very important election cycle in New York. As you know, I indicated before, we also have these congressional seats, which are not about New York state government, but will contribute to who controls the House of Representatives in Washington after this election cycle. Democrats are hoping to flip the House. There are several New York districts, like you said about the state Senate. There are several in the House. Again, mostly not in New York City because of how heavily Democratic it is, although the one Staten Island seat is usually in play in some way. So people need to watch for that. And we also have U.S. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is on the ballot this year. U.S. senators are staggered, so we only have one senator on the ballot, and she is facing a Republican opponent. She also, like Andrew Cuomo, has some presidential buzz. So there's a lot to watch for this year. Final thought on what's at stake, you know, in terms of the federal level for the election cycle?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see how New York contributes to what happens overall in Congress, right? I think the Democrats are hoping to be able to win enough seats to take back the House of Representatives. In order to do that, they'll need to win in lots of different places. And so, like, you know, does New York contribute to a big wave with there's a few Republicans that are in really tough races this year.
And they have to decide how to handle the Donald Trump question, which will also come back to the Republican side of the gubernatorial race, which I'm sure we'll discuss in the future. Christina Greer, Brendan Cheney, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.